Why would anyone deliberately leave a 60-mile hole in a highway connecting North and South America? In 2026, it looked like that question was about to disappear. New roads, new bridges, construction crews pushing deeper into the Darien jungle than they had in decades. For the first time in half a century, it seemed the gap would finally close. And then it didn't. Because the Darien Gap isn't a construction failure, it's one of the most intentional missing links on Earth. The construction crews were faced with a monumental task. Take a look at Google Earth. The road they're using to move their equipment around is the Pan American Highway, the longest road in the world. Almost 19,000 miles of continuous asphalt connecting Prudhoe Bay, Alaska with Ushuaia, Argentina. Notice that word, almost. The new bridges will cover some of that distance, but they don't come anywhere close to the border. Instead, they stop at the edge of Darien National Park. There's an obvious answer why. The gap spans 1.4 million acres. That's the size of Delaware in the jungle. The vegetation is so thick that sunlight barely touches the ground in some places. Hundreds of raging rivers flow through it, swelled by torrential rainfall. Building a road through it would mean fighting water, mud, and jungle every step of the way. Mountains surround it, making access to the gap even more difficult. Now add venomous snakes, spiders, and scorpions to the mix. Get bit by Fer-de-Lance pit vipers, and you have 10 minutes to inject the antivenom before dying. That's just small ones, too. But the real killers are the mosquitoes. Malaria is surging across Panama. There were 4,200 cases in 2021. That jumped to 15,000 in 2024. The timing is no coincidence because these are all just the natural dangers. Even after the swamps, even after the jungle, even after the disease, people still want to build the road. For more than 500 years, the Darien has punished anyone who underestimated it. Conquistadors disappeared into it. Scotland bankrupted itself trying to conquer it. It's not the place to test nature. Besides, what good would a road do? Any human construction built in a place like this will fall to pieces quickly without constant maintenance. Engineers say the road itself could even dissolve in the rain. The project just isn't feasible. Or is it? The US government actually had plans for 2 engineering projects in the Darien Gap just a decade apart. The first came in 1964, and it was creative. America had more nuclear weapons than it knew what to do with back then. So, why not use a few hundred of them to make a brand new canal? The plan was to spend about $185 million in today's money on setting off 294 nuclear bombs in 14 separate locations to clear the way. The total yield would be over 3 times as powerful as the Soviet Union's Tsar Bomba. And it would have gone ahead, too. The engineers said it was perfectly feasible. There was the issue of relocating the 30,000 indigenous people that lived in the area, and there's probably going to be a whole lot of international blowback. With the right incentives, governments have a way of making supposedly impossible engineering projects happen. Swamps, mountains, deserts, doesn't matter. If the political will exists, engineers usually find a way. So what if the jungle isn't the real reason the road was never built? By the 2020s, a different explanation was starting to emerge. The Darien Gap wasn't just a stretch of wilderness anymore. It had become one of the most important migration corridors in the Western Hemisphere. In her final year as commander of U.S. Southern Command, General Laura J. Richardson testified before Congress and framed the Darien Gap as one of the routes to the north for people from South America. Suddenly, the gap looked different. Not as a failed infrastructure project, but as a strategic barrier. The terrain didn't stop the road. Someone just decided that the terrain was more useful than the road. To understand why, all you have to do is follow the people already crossing. 2022 didn't begin well for a young couple from Haiti. Jean and Rose Harima were only 2 among a group of 50, but their journey would be tougher than anyone else's. They started at the Colombian side of the border, but everyone else in the group abandoned them when they got to the first hill. They'd come to the Serrania de Tacarcuna, mountains tall enough to reach into the clouds. Rose was pregnant, but she and Jean continued anyway. The mountains weren't the real danger. They wanted to stay out of the jungle. Earlier, they had wandered off the trail and found the bodies of migrants who had made the journey before them. Then things got worse. In the middle of nowhere, Rose went into labor. There was no hospital or doctor nearby. There was no way out. Rose gave birth to a healthy baby boy, but now they faced a new problem. They still had miles to go and no way to carry him, so they improvised. Using a spare t-shirt, they fashioned a makeshift sling and continued north. They said their son gave them the courage to keep moving. They would need every bit of it. The only way forward was through the jungle. For 3 days, they moved through the forest, exhausted and constantly on edge. The sound of their newborn crying could have given away their position. Eventually, they made it. After days of hiking, walking, and carrying a baby born in the wilderness, they arrived at the migrant reception station in Panama. They were safe. By the time they handed over their documents at the reception station, they had already entered a system that had been running since 2011. Long before they reached the US border, Washington probably knew exactly who they were. It proves that the Darien Gap isn't an empty wilderness. It's full of indigenous people, full of others looking for a new life. With them come man-made dangers that are even worse than the natural ones. People like Jean and Rose are coming from far further afield than Haiti. Some come from Africa and Southeast Asia. Others come from countries like Somalia and Nepal. They're moving north, trying to get to the United States or Canada. Over 1 million people crossed through the Darien Gap between 2021 and 23. And in 2023, 113,000 were children, many of them abandoned or left behind. Of course, migrants aren't the only people moving through the Darien. Criminal gangs use it for smuggling and human trafficking, which means Panama has to patrol one of the most difficult environments on Earth. That's the job of SENAFRONT, Panama's border force. But there's a problem. Like I said earlier, the Darien is huge. It's not like a handful of patrol officers can't simply seal it off, so Panama doesn't do it alone. It has the help from the US. It gets training by the US Army. The Pentagon hands out equipment like advanced night vision goggles, radios, and patrol boats. The US Embassy in Panama announced a $1 million grant for new rough-terrain patrol vehicles and a new command center. There's also an additional $400,000 in funding coming soon. So the Darien Gap isn't just full of snakes, migrants, or border patrols. It's also full of American surveillance equipment. In return, Washington gets a treasure chest of intimate, personal secrets in return. In 2011, under the Obama administration, the United States started collecting biometric data from people coming through the jungles of Panama, all thanks to the gear provided to SENAFRONT. By 2018, this wasn't an ad hoc arrangement anymore. Congress made it permanent. Witness accounts describe people being stopped in remote jungle communities, taken into custody by Panamanian authorities, and transported to detention facilities far from the public eye. From there, the process continues. Details are taken and biometric data is collected. Then, they're moved on. The important thing isn't where they go next. It's that long before they reach the US border, they've already entered the system. In a sense, the journey through the Darien isn't just a trek through the wilderness, it's also the first checkpoint. By the time some migrants arrive thousands of miles later at the southern border of the United States, officials may already know exactly who they are. As you'd imagine, the program has its critics. The US government isn't one of them, and neither is SENAFRONT. That's why the militarization of the Darien Gap is expanding. Ambassador to Panama, Kevin Moreno Cabrera, characterized the recent grants from Washington as a way to advance regional priorities and secure borders. The timing of the grant and statement was, again, not a coincidence. Regional border security was about to become a much bigger deal. Then, in March of 2026, as the new bridges were going up in the Darien, political leaders from across Latin America gathered in Miami. You'd expect them to be talking about trade, investment, or economic growth. They weren't. The focus was organized crime. The attendees left with plans for deeper intelligence sharing, closer security cooperation, and stronger efforts to stop illegal migration before it reached the US. For decades, people assumed the gap survived because nobody could build a road through it. But by 2026, the discussion wasn't about how to cross the Darien. It was about how to control it. The jungle had become strategically valuable, a place where migrants, smugglers, and criminal networks could be tracked, monitored, and intercepted long before they reached North America, which creates a strange incentive. If the gap disappears, so does the security net. Senafront now says its goal is to establish a single corridor in the Darien Gap that leads to the indigenous community of Bajo Chiquito. Humanitarian is the word the agency used for the idea. So Senafront watches and waits for people to cross. But something still seems strange. Why would the US government, under both Democratic and Republican administrations, be so eager to spend millions of dollars to watch poor migrants in the jungle and collect their biometric data? Because the jungle doesn't deter everyone. That means someone's profiting from the travel route. Very few people are prepared to cross through an environment like the Darien Gap alone. It's not just about avoiding the bandits hiding in the jungle. On July 24, 2024, 10 people drowned at the same time in one of the rivers. These were only 10 of the hundreds of drowning victims over the years. No one knows the real number. It's a continuing theme here. Cross the wrong point of a river and you'll simply be swept away. Cross the wrong mountain and you'll fall to your death. Since there's no road, the migrants need guides who know the way. The problem is that no legitimate travel organization would set up shop in the Darien Gap, so the only guides are the ones you'd never want. The early 2020s migrant surge through the jungle meant that business was booming for criminal organizations. General Richardson called them out by name: Venezuela's Tren de Aragua gang and Colombia's Clan de Golfo cartel. They were the ones she said had day-to-day control of the Darien Gap. These organizations have built their own roads in the dirt. They hang ropes above river crossings and have even carved stairs into rock formations. The cartels then advertise these routes on social media. They use influencers on YouTube and TikTok to portray the Darien Gap as a scenic jungle cruise on the way north, a path to a better life. When they're not doing that, they're posting ads like a legitimate travel agency, insisting that safety is their top priority. Below that, they advertise that the travel package includes meals, official boat tickets, and experienced local guides. But they also warn that space is limited, so if you want to come, you have to act now. It's a pretty slick operation. The migrants then book their journeys on WhatsApp, come to the Colombian side of the Darien Gap, and get hit with the brutal reality. The trip typically takes between 7 and 15 days, depending on the route. The criminals charged $125 per migrant on the slow route and between $400 and $1,000 a head for the quicker ones. The cartels provide horses for the $1,000 route, but there aren't many migrants that can afford this. They typically come from China or other wealthier countries. But even being able to afford the cheapest route is a lucky break. If the migrants can't pay any of the fees, the cartel forces them to become mules that transport cocaine instead. The International Crisis Group found that the smuggling fees generate millions of dollars a week. That's not including the extortion or the money the criminals get from concessions. There really are concession stands along the route, with vendors hawking water and Gatorade. Some even offer to carry children on their backs for $100, and they charge $50 an hour for Wi-Fi, because they can. Without it, the migrants can't get in touch with their families or raise the money they need to continue the journey. Everything the migrants need on the route is here. Food, medicine, or even plastic bags to secure their passports and other important documents, they all come with an exorbitant price tag. But all of this is still only the secondary source of revenue. Drugs are the most important, so each migrant boat is accompanied by boats that transport drugs. If waterborne patrols from Senafront approach to intercept them, the cartels throw the migrants overboard into the swirling current, so the officers are forced to try and rescue them. That way, the drugs can still get through. But those aren't the only crimes being committed here. The women naturally have it worse than the men. As hard as her ordeal was, Rose Harima turned out to be one of the Darien Gap's fortunate women because she wasn't assaulted. As you might expect, sexual violence is common here. In December of 2023, Doctors Without Borders reported 214 cases of sexual assault for the month in the Darien Gap. That was 7 times higher than the rates from a year earlier. Of course, the real rate is much higher than that. No one knows what it is because most of the cases never get reported, especially now. The Panamanian government shut down Doctors Without Borders in the Darien Gap in March of 2024. It was the first of a series of new crackdowns in the jungle. The United States officially declared Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization in February of 2025. Clan de Golfo Cartel was declared one the following December. That classification does matter a lot. It means the US military can legally strike against those groups wherever they are. Technically, it means that you could see special elite forces operating against guerrillas in the Central American jungle. Wouldn't closing the Darien Gap and completing the Pan American Highway do more against these supposed terror groups? Drone strikes don't solve the problem. Well, others would fill their place faster than the rivers flow in the jungle. But a paved road and a $20 bus ticket, that destroys the cartel's business model overnight. The United States claims to want to stop drug and human trafficking through the Darien Gap, but by funding the absence of infrastructure, Washington guarantees the terrain stays lawless and the cartels can still make money. It also guarantees that the non-criminal locals get the short end of the stick. Once again, the Darien Gap is full, not just with criminals, but with locals. They're often indigenous people like the Ambera, Wonan, and Kuna. They've been there for hundreds of years. Their way of life survived one attempt at colonization after another. They survived because the Darien remained isolated. But isolation comes with a price. Imagine needing a hospital and realizing the nearest one is hours away by river, or a child whose trip to school begins with a boat ride through the jungle. Imagine an emergency help can't be called because there isn't even a cell tower nearby. For many communities in the Darien, that's normal life. Getting anywhere means navigating rivers, muddy trails, and dense forest. A trip that would take minutes elsewhere can consume most of a day. These are the true invisible people. The migrants who are trying to get past the Darien Gap get worldwide media coverage. Few people talk about the locals suffering from the malaria the surge in migration has brought, or who are struggling to eke out a living on the edge of the wilderness. None of these are unintended consequences. They're known. They're documented side effects of a deliberate policy that goes back decades, and one that's still expanding. The same road that governments view as a security problem could be a lifeline for the people who actually live in the gap. The United States and Panama now do more than just share equipment or biometric data. In July of 2024, the two countries launched a new migrant cooperation program. The United States would now help Panama to deport foreigners found in Panama without legal immigration status. Panama would select the people who were found to violate its immigration laws. Uncle Sam would then shell out the money for the deportation flights. Then, in February of 2025, the program expanded. Panama would now accept third-country migrants from the United States for repatriation to their home countries. The first such flight actually arrived the day before. It came from the United States to Panama, carrying 119 people from countries like China, India, Iran, and even Uzbekistan. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that Panama's willingness to accept these flights shows it's sent a clear message to stem the flow of illegal and mass migration, which is destructive and destabilizing. Since then, the United States government has spent over $14 million on repatriation flights. Airfare, interpreters, and even escorts are all covered by it. But the flights aren't the only piece of transportation the United States is funding in Panama. The United States isn't funding the new bridges in the Darien Gap directly, but it does give Panama indirect support through the equipment being used in the construction effort. Overall, Washington sent almost $73 million in aid to Panama in 2024. Almost $13 million came from the State Department under the vague label of advisory and assistance. Another $7.9 million was for equipment, lands, and structures. The bridges fall under this category. That's why they're not really infrastructure. They're not a road. They're not there to help the locals or migrants. They're for better border security. The bridges allow Sanafront and other organizations to get their new all-terrain vehicles and surveillance equipment into Darien National Park. Meanwhile, interceptor boats from the National Air and Naval Service keep all approaches covered. From there, they can intercept migrants and eventually put them on one of those flights home. The total amount of money spent on plugging the Darien Gap comes close to $100 million in just 1 year. The conclusion seems inescapable. The US government is paying for the Darien Gap to exist, not to be closed. It sounds strange, but there's a strategic logic behind it. For decades, American planners have believed that controlling key choke points can be more valuable than controlling territory itself. If you can control where people, goods, and information move, you gain leverage over everyone who needs to pass through. That thinking has shaped US strategy around the world, from major shipping lanes to narrow straits. And in a way, the Darien Gap functions as a choke point too, just for people. From coast to coast, it's about 60 miles wide, and the break in the road doesn't just mean that migrants get filtered through the jungle. It also means that cross-continental trade depends almost exclusively on the sea. The Panama Canal is nearby for a reason. The United States might have given up direct control of that zone in 1999, but it still exercises indirect control through the sea patrols of the US Navy. With command of the sea lanes, the Navy monitors every cargo ship and every container that passes through the Panama Canal or anywhere near it. And don't even think about crossing between the Americas by car without that road. No one even managed to do it until 1960, and that trip took 5 months. But suppose there's a road that creates a land bridge between North and South America. Now, the US military doesn't get to control it, at least not without landing some Marines on the shore. And that means it isn't just migrants that are coming. The Chinese are too. This is the Chancay megaport north of Lima, Peru. It opened in 2024 and cost $3.5 billion to build. Peru didn't raise all of that money on its own, though. The money came as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The port that broke American dominance over South American trade is operated by a Chinese state-owned shipping company with a 60% controlling stake. COSCO built it, COSCO runs it. And the US Navy has no legal mechanism to monitor what moves through it. Before Chancay opened, South America had no port which could handle ships that carry between 18 and 24,000 tons of shipping containers. The only ports deep enough to dock ships of that size were in Mexico or the US Pacific coast. Now, that's all changed. In April of 2025, China announced the first major shipping lane from the port of Guangzhou directly to Chancay. No more detour to North American ports. The United States had lost its status as the middleman in the commerce between Asia and South America. For now, Chancay is still just a port that serves Asia. It's cut shipping time between Asia and South America from 45 to 23 days. But China's ambition is bigger than that. So the Darien Gap is becoming even more important. The US government would, in private, point to China and say that its activities stress the importance of keeping that hole in the road. The cartels, the policing, the almost 2 million people that try to cross anyway. The new bridge is coming as China's port ramps up its operations. All of these things go back to one decision made in the 1970s that nobody wants to reverse. Up to then, the United States was the leading champion of the Pan American Highway. So in 1971, it pledged $100 million, $836 million in today's money, to complete the road. That was 2/3 of the estimated budget. Colombia and Panama would provide the remaining third. The money would buy 250 miles of new road through the Darien Gap. According to President Nixon, the highway would become a pulsing artery of trade, travel, and understanding. If all went well, the road would be completed in 10 years. But Nixon wanted to speed up the timeline to coincide with America's bicentennial. He also thought that the Darien section of the highway would be named after him. This was the US government's second plan for engineering the Darien Gap in the 20th century. So the construction crews came, this time without the nukes. The equipment was in place, it did not get done by the bicentennial. Nixon resigned in August of 1974. The road was not among his final priorities. But by the summer of 1977, the three countries had spent $59 million on the project. That money was not well spent. In fact, it got nothing. The Sierra Club got the credit for stopping the road, but the real reason was stranger. The United States Department of Agriculture had an argument too. It didn't really care about the jungle or the indigenous people, but it did care about the spread of foot and mouth disease in livestock. The Darien was a natural barrier to stop it. In 1914, an outbreak in Chicago's stockyards spread to 3,500 herds around the country and cost $150 million in today's money to eradicate. It's only gotten more expensive. In 2022, a team of agricultural economists estimated that the price tag was between $6.5 and $21 billion a year in areas where foot and mouth disease is common. But that's only the endemic cost, the low-level churn worldwide. When foot and mouth disease becomes an epidemic, especially in a country where it didn't used to be, the cost can rise to $10 billion in just that place. That's what we saw during the outbreak in the United Kingdom in 2001. All work on the project came to a screeching halt 3 years earlier. It kickstarted a tradition that goes right down to where we are now. As the engineering teams gathered in the jungle, teams of environmentalists gathered to protect it. Back then, the Darien Gap was almost completely covered in rainforest. An environmental group, the Sierra Club, sued the government in 1974, claiming it failed to provide the required environmental impact statement about the road. The United States District Court for the District of Columbia agreed and temporarily halted any further construction. But the government wasn't prepared to give up just yet. Like most litigation, it was a long, winding road. At first, it looked like the government would win. Then, an unexpected ally showed up to save the day. It turned out that not everyone in the government was thrilled about the idea of completing the Pan American Highway. The USDA demanded that the road be blocked. Period. So the Sierra Club's initial injunction stayed for a completely different reason than it was put in for. The timing proved to be good for the environmentalists, because in 1977, Panama entered a period of political upheaval under the nationalist military government of Omar Torrijos. At the same time, negotiations over the Panama Canal began to dominate Washington's attention. Suddenly, the Darien Gap wasn't a priority anymore. Today, foot and mouth disease isn't as much of a problem south of the Darien Gap. It only occurs sporadically in Venezuela. The rest of South America is now considered free of it with vaccination. So the risk of an epidemic through the Darien Gap has become highly unlikely. That's why in 1992, the U.S. Department of Agriculture broke ranks with the Sierra Club. No foot and mouth meant there was no more legal basis for the injunction. If the U.S. government appealed the injunction, it would almost certainly be overturned. So people talked about building the road again. Transport along the Darien Gap opened up in the mid-1990s, but not by road. It came with the Crucero Express ferry. That stayed open for a few years, and then it closed because it cost too much to operate. Once again, it took a ship or a plane to get around the Darien Gap, and the Pan American Highway remains, essentially, a road to nowhere. Washington's policy also changed during that time. The champion of the Pan American Highway now became its antagonist. After the injunction, the United States began to see the Darien Gap as an opportunity instead of an obstacle. The jungle proved to be more useful. A paved highway requires policing. A lawless jungle polices itself, and no one pays much attention to a remote jungle. So the Darien Gap became a nice little filter for the US Navy's control of the region, deniable and politically invisible. The Clan del Golfo's migrant passage fees, the millions that crossed earlier this decade, the US funding for Senafront's patrols, they all exist because of one outdated 50-year-old injunction that started the pattern of convenience. In 1979, Colombia expanded Los Catillos Park, originally tied to early road planning efforts. Officially, it was framed as a buffer against foot and mouth spread. In practice, it created more legal and environmental restrictions around the area. In 1994, UNESCO declared Los Catillos a World Heritage Site. Suddenly, this wasn't just a remote jungle anymore, it was protected on a global level. The Darien is now one of the most biodiverse regions on Earth, home to jaguars, monkeys, and thousands of species of insects and amphibians found nowhere else. Which means any attempt to cut through it runs into more than terrain. It runs into international law, environmental protection, and overlapping conservation priorities. Every new designation adds another barrier. Every barrier adds another delay. That's why the US government can say with a straight face that it's not so eager to repeat the experience of the 1970s, especially when there's yet another local concern. Despite the harsh local life and the opportunities the road could bring, the indigenous people in the Darien Gap say they're not so eager to see it completed. They believe that the construction could disrupt their way of life and bring other dangers. There have already been problems with illegal logging and gold mining that's led to mercury pollution in the local rivers. Building the road would only lead to more of that. But doesn't this still seem odd? The US government doesn't exactly have a history of siding with environmentalists and indigenous rights activists, but there's a reason for that. The flow of illegal immigration through the Darien Gap dropped by 99% between 2024 and 25. The new measures with Panama clearly seem to be working. Washington might not care a lot about the locals and environment, but this is worth not having a road. And that drop came at just the right time. Because those new bridges in Panama aren't the only constructions intruding into the Darien Gap in 2026. China's Belt and Road Initiative isn't just about ports. Engineers have begun to work in South America. Colombia was a notable absence at the meeting in Florida. It's not a coincidence. It's aligning to China instead. In 2025, it signed on to China's Belt and Road Initiative. New roads are starting to go up, and they're approaching the southern end of the Darien Gap, where the Pan-American Highway ends. This is the Motorway to the Sea 2, which links the Darien Gap with Medellin. The Chinese started with a 30% stake in this project, but then it increased to 65% with an investment of $650 million in 2020. The new construction is gradually replacing the notorious dirt roads in the area. China's selling it as a way to make travel safer from landslides. But that's far from the only surge in Chinese activity in South America. In July of 2025, as the migrant traffic dropped, China signed a new Memorandum of Understanding with Brazil. If China gets its way here, it would restructure continental trade from coast to coast. The proposed Central Bioceanic Railway Corridor would connect the Pacific port of Chancay across 2,300 miles to Brazil's port of Ilhas on the Atlantic coast. If the project goes forward, it could cost at least $70 billion, but that's a price China seems pretty eager to pay. Peru has already announced its support for the project, because just like with Washington, there are no coincidences with Beijing. The timing for the new agreements with Brazil is too convenient. China's floated the idea for a transcontinental railroad in South America since the BRICS summit in 2014. But new developments are making it a lot more attractive for everyone. The Panama Canal has been facing droughts and struggling to accommodate the size of modern ships. So China sees a window to bypass one of the US Navy's most vital choke points on international trade right in its own backyard. China is already South America's largest trading partner. That wasn't the case when the Sierra Club sued the Department of Transportation. The United States still prevails in trade volume north of the Darien Gap, but if those last few miles of road get built, all bets are off. And that's the real reason the bridges in the jungle are being built now. They're not a dramatic departure from 50 years of policy. They're the latest way for the US government to keep an outdated and temporary injunction permanent. Just imagine a road connecting the Americas. Goods no longer depend on sea routes or the Panama Canal, they just move over land. For Washington, that changes everything. The choke points disappear, the surveillance corridors and leverage all become less relevant, and in geopolitical terms, that means something bigger. Control over inter-American trade would no longer sit with the United States. Once a choke point stops being a choke point, it stops being power. The way Washington now sees it, the Darien Gap is an asset that's too valuable to lose. People haven't wanted to build a road there since the 1970s, not because they can't build one, but because they're not supposed to build one. So, the bulldozers stay rusted, the jungle stays intact, China stays out, and the system keeps on running. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.